Start small. It's like dating. You go out for coffee the first time. You don't propose the first time. You don't have to go into somebody's office and say, can you set up 10 internships? Bring them in as a guest speaker. It's an hour or two commitment. Let them get to know the kids, give them a tour of the program, whatever it is. But start small. Let them start to develop relationships with kids. And then they can start to see these kids grow. And by the time they're ready for an internship or an apprenticeship or something like that, they've known these kids, and they've watched these kids. And it's not a scary thing. And it's like, yes, I'm happy to help this kid who I see with potential advance further in a field that we're dying for people.
Hello and welcome to the Future is Clear, Teach Like It's 2045 webcast series. My name is Scott Carr from CESA 2. Today's topic area is business partnerships, investing in the future with early talent development. Joining us today is Brett Pawlowski, CEO and founder from Roundhouse Partnerships. Welcome, Brett.
Thanks, Scott. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. How are you doing? Staying busy? How's it going for you?
Yeah, it's going well. I've been in the space for a while, but just launched Roundhouse earlier this year and got a really good reception. So I'm pretty excited about the future.
Yeah, I bet. I know you've done some really, really great things in our space, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. In relationship to what you've done, in the business partnershiping with school systems specifically. But to get started, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get where you're at and what you're doing now?
Sure. So, with all the gray hair, the career's been fairly long. Started in education actually after having been in magazine publishing. So I kind of ended up in education by accident and started working with employers who wanted to connect with schools. And at the time, this was like my foray into education. It was more along the lines of sort of branded content where the Weather Channel wanted lesson plans on the weather, or Citigroup wanted a financial literacy curriculum, something like that. Which is fine, but it also gave me a path into this field, and I realized that was one very narrow band of a very wide spectrum of ways that employers can be involved in education, which I thought was very exciting. So I started to do some work in this field with my own company at the time called De Havilland Associates. Had a friend at ACTE who came to me, and this is probably about 2010, 2011, and said, we need a book on advisory boards. Could you write it? And I said, I'd be happy to. Do you have anybody I could work with who's got a lot of connections in the field so we could do some interviews, case study, that sort of thing? And they introduced me to a guy named Hans Meter. Hans came out of the U.S. Department of Education. It's Octane now, but it was Ove at the time. And we wrote a book called Building Advisory Boards That Matter for ACTE. And because we worked together so well, he came to me after we wrote the book and he said, I've had this idea for a national group focused on college career pathways. Do you want to start it together? And so we founded the National Center for College and Career Transitions, or NC3T, back in 2012. And we did a ton of work. We worked with a lot of state departments of education. Hans is sort of a jack of all trades. He's got deep knowledge in a lot of areas. And I was always sort of the partnerships guy. So employer engagement, work-based learning, advisory boards, that sort of thing. In about 2017, we started to look at the field, and somebody asked me a question, with all this work-based learning, how are teachers actually keeping track of all this stuff? And I didn't really know. And so we started to ask around. And it was, it's Excel spreadsheets, it's yellow pads, it's manila folders. And so we had the idea, well, why don't we build an app, an online work-based learning management system? And so I created Seamless Work-Based Learning, which, at the time was one of the first work-based learning management applications. And the timing was, lucky is really what it was, because just as we launched that, Perkins 5 came out, where work-based learning was one of the quality indicators. So it gave us a huge head start in the market.
Wow.
And we grew that to, I think we had at our peak maybe about 1,000 schools on Seamless. In 2022, Hans and I sold NC3T to a company called UScience,
Hmm.
and they do a ton of stuff. They do aptitude assessments, certifications, all sorts of stuff. And they needed a work-based learning tool, and they liked the consulting side of the business. So we sold NC3T to them, and Hans and I both stayed on there for a couple of years to help with the transition. And in January of this year, we both left. Hans is off doing his consulting on college career
Yep.
pathways. And I really struggled with, now that I've left and we've sold NC3T, what do I want to do? And I really love this space. I think the work is important. I think connecting students with
Hmm.
the world of work, I think bringing employers into the classroom is really, really important work.
Hmm.
And I think the people who do this work are awesome.
Hmm.
People who can speak both languages, who can bring these different worlds together, just, some of the best people you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
And so, quite honestly, I still can't say I know exactly what my company is because I'm still trying to sort of feel around the edges to see what the market really needs. But my goal is to change practice. I want to
Hmm.
make some sort of, it's like I would call it a legacy project. I want to leave education at some point knowing that I've improved work-based learning and employers' role in education.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I am now. And I've got a few things going, wrote a new book on advisory boards. I've got a new suite of services for partnership development,
Hmm.
but it's still trying to figure out exactly who I am.
Yeah. That's okay, right? I mean, the amount of invested time you've had in our space in our field, man, you're deserving to take the time and try to nail it down. I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and then also, taking a peek at some of the stuff that you shared with me. Very intriguing. One of the things that I like to lead into as we go through the pod is, why does education need to change itself, right? Why do we need to see and do some things differently? So I guess my question would be why? Why do you see the need? But also understanding kind of the history of this because of your long line of invested work in this, which I think is great. How has that helped you understand um, the why, but also the direction we need to go?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and we could talk for a whole hour about the
Yeah.
history of employers in education.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't realize that employers were the reason the public education system started. Back in 1850s or whatever it was, back in Massachusetts, um, there was a guy, and I cannot remember his name. It's not Penn. Anyway, the guy who had the idea for public education
Mm.
went to the legislature and they turned him down. He went to the business community and said, "Wouldn't it be great if all of your workers had sort of a shared sense of identity and a shared baseline of literacy and numeracy?" And it was the employers who then went to the legislators and said, "You've got to do this." And that's officially how public education started. And of course, employers were instrumental in starting vocational education
Yeah.
back in the 20s. And they've been involved and sort of dropped off in the 60s and 70s, really sort of came back in the 80s after the Nation at Risk report came out, saying, we've got a crisis. Well, students are disengaged, our outcomes are not good. And employers sort of came back, but it's been, with mixed results. I think employers have been engaged.
Hmm.
And I think that there are certainly some highlights. I think especially the rebranding of vocational education to career and technical education and the focus on rigor and relevance has been a huge
Yeah.
success. And I think where we've seen employers engaged, they've done a phenomenal job and seen real fantastic outcomes. I'd like to see us do 10 times what we're doing. And I think there's an opportunity for that because I think it was the Business Higher Education Forum did a study last year, and this was college level, where they found that there were like 8.4 million students who wanted internships, but only, I think, 3.6 million had internships.
Wow.
So there was a real need. Um, a lot more students could really connect with the employment community. And on the flip side, employers are facing a workforce crisis. They have
Hmm.
this huge, deep labor pool of qualified workers, the baby boomer generation, the skilled generation, they're all retiring now. And they've got to be able to replace these skilled workers, and they just don't have the pool of labor to do it. And so there's a real need for employers to engage in education, which is it's interesting because if you look at the workforce systems that are out there, they pretty much treat education as sort of a black box. Like early talent doesn't exist until they come out of post-secondary or until they enter the workforce. Um, and there's so much opportunity to connect employers to students as they start career awareness, as they start career exploration.
Hmm.
Um, they could really influence and introduce young people to some really fantastic occupations that they may not know about, or they may have misperceptions, but they could be a great fit and a great opportunity. So I think on both sides, in terms of student engagement and development and preparation, in terms of employers bringing along the next generation of skilled workers, there's just such a need for people like you and people like me to be those intermediaries
Yeah.
connecting the two.
Yeah. The I did read a little bit about the what you identify as that black box problem. I was intrigued. Um, Say a little bit more about that, and why is that problematic for both employers and the students?
Well, young people without the influence and connection to industry,
Hmm.
if they're left to their own devices to figure
Hmm.
out where they want to go in the future, they're within the education system, which is sort of a womb-like environment. Unless they find their way into career and technical education, they get very little exposure
Right.
to the options that they could have. And so I think a lot of them look more for the people sort of occupations, like all the occupations you think about when you're a little kid. I want to be a fireman. I want to be a teacher. I want to be a
Right.
policeman. Um, and they are not exposed to. I could work in manufacturing. I could work in construction. I could work in these skilled areas. And we actually just or UScience did a study because UScience is collecting data on interests and aptitudes.
Hmm.
And they found that for young people, a lot of them have interest in those people jobs, but not as many have aptitude for those. And there's
Hmm.
a lot of students that have a lot of aptitude for those technical jobs, but not a lot of interest just because
Right.
they haven't had the exposure. And so if industry just leaves education to its own devices, those kids will never even be exposed to those occupations.
Yeah.
And even where they are, there's a lot of misinformation, manufacturing, um, dark and dirty. That's sort of the
Right.
impression that people have when it's actually not that at
Yeah.
all anymore.
Right.
And so they don't get a realistic sense of what their potential could be. So if industry just leaves education alone, kids are going to sort of self-select into fields that may not have as much demand and they may not be suited for.
Yeah.
And so I think it's critical for industry to get involved and sort of just help them see what their opportunities are and help them prepare.
Yeah, you're spot on in regards to what people think it is versus what it really is.
Right.
In a lot of the career pathways that we offer, because we are not creating opportunities for immersion out or those businesses to be able to come in
Yeah.
to our educational our school system. Um, Talk a little bit about what can it look like then, because I really enjoy the fact that and when we met, I was like, man, this is perfect because you do tend to feel like you represent the employer side in a way, the business
Mhm.
side. So talk to our listeners here a little bit about what can it look like?
Yeah. So it's really interesting that employers can be very vocal about their needs, But
Mm.
when they go to actually approach education, they're very deferential. They'll come in and they'll
Mhm.
say, we want to help. We have these needs, but we're not teachers. We don't understand education. So
Yeah,
you just tell us what to do.
right.
And that's not the right approach because they're not going to have their needs met. They've got to be more active and vocal in how they engage with young people. I think one of the most powerful levers for change are advisory boards,
Mm.
where employers are supposed to be the voice of industry to be able to help educators make their programs relevant and rigorous. And advisory boards as a rule, and there's certainly a lot of great exceptions out there. There's certainly some
Right.
fantastic advisory boards. But for the most part, they're very underutilized and underenergized.
Yeah.
It's, I'm going to bring in people once a year. I'm going to talk at them for an hour. I'll lure them in with coffee and donuts. Yeah, I check that off the list.
Right.
Yeah, I'm required to do it, so I'll do it, but I'm going to put as little into it as possible. And they don't get the benefit of industry's voice. And that's where industry has an opportunity to get engaged. And so when I talk to people about building effective advisory boards, my first recommendation is let them advise. You know, I,
Yeah.
I I invited you to be
Yeah.
on this board, and it says advisory board. So give me a chance to share my knowledge and insights. And if you do that, then industry starts to get engaged. And when industry starts to get engaged, they start to invest.
Yeah.
And they'll say, I can bring in some volunteers. I can get you some equipment. I can bring your kids out to our facility. We can do site tours, and we can walk through your program and see, you've got this equipment. Is this still relevant to industry? And if not, I can help you get new equipment.
Yeah.
Let's look at the curriculum. Is this relevant to what current practice is in the industry? And so you start to get employers involved in that way. And when they start to feel invested in your program, that's where the real opportunities really start to open up. And you see the guest speakers and the site visits, and then you start to
Yeah.
see the internships and the impact that has on young people, even guest speakers. I've talked to so many teachers that said, I've got an attendance problem, but when I've got an employer coming in
Right.
to talk, every
Right.
single kid is there.
Right.
Um, and what you see with the impact that internships make. There was a great report, and it's old. It was the Gates Foundation, maybe mid 90s, but they did a survey of high school dropouts. And they said, what would have allowed you to stay in school? What would have encouraged you and made the
Yeah.
difference? And the biggest response was show me the relevance,
Yeah.
connect me with
Yeah.
industry. And that would have kept those kids in school. And so it's all about engagement and relevance.
Yeah.
And industry can help with all of that.
Yeah. Totally agree. We're seeing it in a lot of the work that we're doing with schools. And to your point, when we bring a real world connection into the classroom, our attendance goes up. What is that telling us, right? It's
Right.
basically saying to us, we ought to do this every day.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we have that marriage every single day? And we still see on our end in the educational field, we see we don't want to build the plate. I say it this way, this isn't more on your plate. This is doing things differently. And
Mhm.
the times our educators will look at it and go, well, we do a lot of design sprinting or design learning and different, engagement activities with the businesses that we work with. But then our educators look at it and say, well, when am I going to get to the content, right? When am I need the time. I can't be putting, let me ask this. So, on the business end of it, you deal with, the business partners. I'm sure there's probably some resistance in a way or questioning of, is this worth our investment? And a lot of the times that talent development, sometimes it takes, numerous years to see that developed. How do you get businesses to understand that measure the return on investment? Going this route and investing in the school system is going to be the benefit and that you can get there quicker. How do you convince business partners to get engaged?
That's a really good question. And the answer is I don't think we know entirely.
Oh, yeah.
Um, I mean, there are two challenges that employers have. Well, three. I'll say three challenges. The first is they've had such a deep labor pool for such a long time. They're used to other people preparing labor for them.
Mm,
So this is kind of a new thing for them to think, if I don't do it, it's not going to happen. But the other two challenges, one, like you say, is the turnaround.
hmm.
When employers think about, recruiting, for example, they're thinking in terms of quarters. They're not thinking in terms of, let me connect with this middle school student
Right.
who's going to have to go through 4 or 5 years, maybe need a 2 year or 4 year degree. That's a long investment and it's
Right.
hard. And the other is, how do you measure the ROI?
Hmm.
Um, People are starting to have those conversations, like, but there's no accepted, sort of set of evaluation tools or dashboards
Hmm.
that can conclusively prove to employers, if you do this, you're going to see changes in your workforce in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. But at the same time, if you're always scrambling, every quarter you're scrambling, you don't do anything different, you're always going to be scrambling.
Hmm.
You've got to invest longer term if you want to see your pipeline fundamentally change. So, I can argue the logic of it,
Right.
but not every employer is going to see it because employers are driven by numbers. They want to see the proof, they want to see the evidence, they want to see the outcomes. And I think just we all in this space have a lot of work to do to start to prove it out to employers.
Hmm. Have you seen, can you give some examples of those that have invested? Because in education, we're always looking at outcome data, right?
Mhm.
State report card. And I love challenging leadership on this thought. Well, what about impact data? And like, well, what is that? Well, those are things that you can't quite, put a number to. Like you can say, wow, look what happened here because we did this. Do you have,
Yeah.
do you have any examples of impact data from this type of work where you see a larger scale of investment out of a business partner?
It's out there, but a lot of it is anecdotal.
Yeah,
A lot of
right.
it is you'll talk to smaller employers who, and so much of this work, and I'm sure you've seen this, so much of this work on the employer side and on the educator side is just driven by champions,
Hmm.
individual people who said, this is important. May not have all the numbers, but I know for a fact it's important. And I'm going to make it happen because
Hmm.
nobody else is. Um, Even for the states that have work-based learning as a quality indicator, um, it's still treated as sort of a nice to have rather than a have to have.
Right.
Um, Unless your job is specifically focused on work-based learning, you probably don't have any employer-based metrics on your annual reviews, for example.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge because this work, as important as it is, as gratifying as it is, as much as we see changes in the students, it's it's still sort of optional,
Yeah.
and it's very time consuming. And that's a reality. And teachers are so pressed for time now anyway, and always have been, but that they're so pressed for time. This is very time intensive. You're not evaluated on it. So the people who do the work are just almost doing it out of just they're Don Quixote, just I've got
Right.
to do this and nothing's going to stop me.
Yeah.
And the same goes with the employers. So I have not seen like large national studies to be able to prove this out. That's one of the problems we have. Nobody's doing those large national studies.
Right.
I would love to see somebody invest in that, but it's not happening.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll start a
Well,
foundation to make it happen. I don't know.
yeah. In education, and I'm sure business is somewhat similar, we tend to really lean back into, when I say back, into best practice, right? Well, okay, that drives what we're going to do tomorrow. And I've really challenged that theory a little bit by saying, nah, I don't know about best practice. Maybe it's next practice.
Mhm.
Looking forward to things that we haven't created yet. Let's be innovative around it. I really do believe best practice is important. You got to pull things from it to allow yourself a direction. But I'm hearing you say we haven't, it doesn't exist yet potentially here. And it's something that we need to see happening and move logically. This makes sense. But being able to bait that hook so people are like, yeah, we need to bite and go.
Yeah, and schools in particular need the freedom to
Yeah.
experiment.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting, and I'm very sympathetic to schools who are saying if we try something new and it doesn't work, we could be hurting students.
Yeah.
And I totally get that, and I take that seriously.
Right.
But at the same time, you've got to realize that the current system we have had no evidence and that had no proof that it worked either.
Right.
You know, we started the education system, we modeled it on factories, which was the
Yeah.
prevailing sort of industrial model at the time. There was no educational evidence that showed that was the right way to teach kids.
Yeah.
Um, so I would love, and I'm on the outside looking in, but I would love to be able to see schools allow some more experimentation and absolutely track all the data.
Yeah.
Figure out what your metrics are, figure out what's important, but give schools some freedom to try different things. And I don't know how to make that happen, but I'm a big advocate of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've got some things happening in our state here, Brett, that, some lab type approaches, and I'm definitely going to get you involved in it because you're a
Cool.
great resource. So look forward to that conversation for sure. But let me ask you this, because I did recognize, or we at CESA too have recognized that our employers understand the need to partnership with our school systems, but the quality and the understanding and the depth of what that looks like it can be varied, right? A lot of our employers look at it as, well, it's work-based, it's youth apprenticeship. What we look at as, no, work-based learning is comprehensive. There's a lot to it. So we've been able to design, a direction to help support our business partners that are partnering with schools and bring that capacity up. However, to our point we're talking about, it's limited businesses looking at it going, this is advantageous for us.
Hmm.
However, I know you talk a little bit about a coalition approach, the ability to how do you bring business partners together to see it as a collective group to be able to approach this more collectively as a structure of a coalition. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the best way to do that is go to where the coalitions already exist.
Yeah.
And if you think about some of these associations in chambers are a fantastic example. Chambers are just groups of businesses that band together to tackle common challenges.
Hmm.
For some it may be tourism, for some it may be legislative challenges, for some it may be economic development. For a ton of them, it's workforce. And it may not be feasible for, me with my small business of 5 people or 10 people or whatever to make a big investment on my own. But if I get together with 100 businesses and we all contribute, we
Hmm.
can present a unified front and, pull together some real resources. Not even meaning money necessarily, but volunteers and direction and political voice. But you go to where the coalitions exist. Chambers are one, trade associations, industry associations. Those people face common challenges as well. And you see, is it the National Manufacturing
Yeah.
Institute?
Yeah.
Um, the construction industry has NCCER,
Yeah.
which is a National Center for Construction Education and Research. Huge organization. The welding people, American Welding Society,
Yeah.
they invest a ton because their members have needs. They have workforce needs, chronic needs. And so you go to where people have already recognized the need. And locally, I mean, it could be the chambers because of workforce. It could be the chambers because of their concern about talent rate.
Yeah.
If young people don't see the opportunities in their community, they'll leave. So let's show them the opportunity in the community. So I think that's probably the best approach is look for where industry has already come together.
Yeah. Great advice. Our good friend Christy Valesky talks a lot about developing your own ecosystem within your own community. So you do create that pipeline. You do offer opportunities for those students right in your own community, because if that's not going to happen in your community, they're going to go elsewhere, and it leaves you then to recruit people back into your community. That becomes very difficult. Talk a little bit about the perception of what we're talking about. And this might lean into technology a little bit, but you're mentioning a lot of different things that if we're having people listen on the outside that's really career movement related, we're hearing construction, manufacturing, some of these different things. How do you get past the perception that these are trades? And my kid needs to go to college versus what Brett's talking about right now.
Yeah.
Now how do we shift that mindset so this is more collective and it leans back into an ecosystem approach?
Yeah. Man, you're asking me all the easy questions today, aren't you? Because that, and I think well, it's always been an issue, but that really picked up steam with that Nation at Risk report.
Mm,
That's
yeah,
when we really hit the everybody's got to go to college um, zeitgeist. And it's very powerful because you talk about young, and the data will show that young people who went to college collectively had higher earnings, for example.
yeah,
Um, that the big numbers sort of hide a lot of churn underneath. It doesn't talk about the debt that they pick up. It doesn't talk about the time lost. It doesn't talk about the fact that those are averages. So some kids may do really well, but a lot of kids don't. Um, and we've overlooked a lot of really good occupations and
mhm,
industries in the process. I have seen individual tactics and strategies that work. Um, there was a school district up in Pennsylvania. I think Wallen-Paupack
mhm,
was the district, and they did something, and I thought this was brilliant. Once a year, they would have a dinner, and they would actually pay for students' SATs, which means that they owned the results. And they would say, if you want your kids' SAT results, you got to come to this dinner. And this dinner was a presentation to be able to say, you
mhm,
know, here's your kids' results. Here's our local colleges. This one you've got to have this SAT to get in. It costs $20,000 a year. But let's look at some alternatives.
yeah,
You could go to this school, this 2-year school, and pay $4,000 all told. And your kid could be in this job with great job security. They could be earning six figures in 5 years, and just at least show them uh, the options that they had available.
right.
And I thought that was so brilliant. I don't know how to cut through 40 years of a drumbeat of everybody go
Oh,
to college,
yeah,
but we have to do it because what we believed 40 years ago is no longer true.
yeah,
Cost of 4-year college keeps going up. The outcomes are floundering. Floundering is probably too strong a word, but they're not what they
yeah,
were.
yeah. I
So
I think you're hitting it right. I'd agree. Been looking at a lot of those. I use a lot of those statistics when I get in front of leadership teams, when I get in to help support school districts to kind of reculture, reimagine, what we could be doing. Those statistics really hit home. Uh,
yeah,
definitely. So I totally agree. Let me ask you this. Again, reading some of the stuff that you've written on. Um, where's the entry point? I know you even talk a little bit about middle school, in where kind of the research suggests that that's a great time to explore. I totally agree. The work that I do, I stretch all the way down to the kindergarten level. But talk a little bit about some of the strategies that you've used to see some of that impact and being impactful and effective with not only the educational system but with the business partners to see it at a lower age.
yeah. I would point to two things. That the first is to bring them in for their expertise.
Yeah.
I did a survey, and this is like years ago, probably 2007. Did a survey of employers, to find out how do you want to contribute to education. And sharing their expertise was far and away the top way that they want to support schools. That can happen through a formal structure like an advisory board,
Yeah.
or it can be informal. Just, let's go take some people out to lunch, take some people out to dinner, and just, tell me what's happening with your industry, what you're looking for in young people. If you ask them what they need and they feel like you're listening honestly to try and improve education and give them better, future candidates, that's really powerful. That opens a door.
Mhm.
The other thing I would suggest is start small. It's like dating. You go out for coffee the first time. You don't propose the first time.
Right.
You don't have to go into somebody's office and say, "Can you set up 10 internships for us?"
Yeah.
Bring them in as a guest speaker. It's an hour or two commitment. Let them get to know the kids. Give them a tour of the program, whatever it is. But start small.
Yeah.
Let them start to develop relationships with kids. And then they can start to see these kids grow. And by the time they're ready for an internship or an apprenticeship or something like that, they've known these kids and they've watched these kids. And it's not a scary thing. And it's like, yes, I'm happy to help this kid who I see with potential um, advance further in a field that we're dying for people. So those would be my two. Ask for them to share their expertise, start small and build a relationship.
Yeah. What do you see you and I are going to go out and change the world around this, right? We're going to do that, Brett.
Yep.
What do you see as our barriers?
The biggest barrier, and I'm working on this now. I've got a little side project. It's evaluation or measurement and evaluation
Yeah.
because schools need outcomes data, employers need outcomes data,
Right.
especially when it comes to work-based learning. We there's a little bit of research out there, but man, we need so much more.
Yeah.
Um, and I think we can do it. I think there are ways to set up measurements to prove the impact of internships on
Hmm.
career direction, on development of knowledge, employability skills, technical skills. I think we can show how we can really move the needle. We're not doing it now. Like if you look at the quality indicators, like workplace learning is a quality indicator for Perkins, and you ask states, because states can say, here's how I want to measure this.
Yeah.
And every state is measuring just by how many internships they have.
Right. Right.
That doesn't tell you anything,
No.
So I want to see impact data. And I think we can do it, but we're going to have to change practice in some ways. I think with internships, I think there's a real opportunity to sit down at the start of an internship with the employer and say, what is a critical skill that a great candidate should have walking into your door?
Hmm.
Let's teach that during this internship. Let's give a kid a chance to experience that and become fluent in it. And we'll do whatever pre and post assessment. We'll do a pre-assessment at the start of the internship, post assessment at the end of the internship, and we'll show this kid grew this critical skill that you need. That's really attractive.
Yeah.
And it goes to the program's relevance and outcomes as well. So that's data that could benefit everybody. I think there's a ton we could do on measurement and evaluation.
Yeah.
And I think we're just at the starting point.
Yeah, you say it really well, and I see it. I see that a ton. And when I have conversation with my colleagues around, chasing numbers versus quality, we
Yeah.
get yeah, we'll get into a little bit of a debate sometimes because I do see it. Okay, we can check the box and identify that we've got X number of youth apprenticeships, or even at our state level, we push here are the indicators, here's how you meet the criteria so you can check the box, which creates that high level of compliance. And
Yeah.
that bothers me a lot in regards to it. But how do you as we move forward in the future, how do we move away from something like that? You talked a little bit about it here just now. where it becomes more intimate. It becomes more where we're in the weeds doing this the right way. I like to look at work-based learning as having three quality, um, uh, I guess I'd say outcomes that we're striving towards. Like it has
Mhm.
to aspire a kid to move towards something. It has
Yep.
to build a durable skill, and it has to increase social, capacity and networking within, the community or wherever they're working.
Hmm.
What do you see as a movement towards getting away from checking a box to quality success? What's that future vision look like?
Wow, another really good question. I think that it really has to come from employers and educators working together more closely
Mm,
to be able to share a sense of you've got to have a great profile of a graduate. You got to be able to say,
right.
you know, when a kid leaves this program, once they've gone through our entire CTE program, they are ready for whatever the next step typically is for that occupation, whether
Hmm.
it's going straight into industry or going into post-secondary. But we've got to know what a great candidate looks like for the next phase of their life. And if we can figure that out, then we can figure out what steps we have to take. And a lot of that,
Yeah.
some of that is coursework, but a lot of it's work-based learning. So how do we structure these experiences
Mhm.
to move the needle on the things we've agreed are important? And it's just much more intentional, I think,
Yeah.
because people know that there's value in work-based learning, even if it's just for workplace skills, interpersonal skills, how to work as a team, how to communicate.
Yeah.
But I think we could be doing so much more. And I think it's those conversations about what does a great candidate look like.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you're moving that direction. You're really speaking my language. A lot of the work that we do when we get in with districts is to, that portrait of a graduate. But I always say to them, let's take a year to develop this. Let's not
Hmm.
just put words on paper because the catalyst behind it is the time that we invest in it, which brings people together, which changes, shifts mindsets and some of that transformation. So appreciate it. Thank you, Brett, because you validated some of the things that we're doing. I appreciate it because I was like, I'm not sure, is that right or not? But we've been able to find some proof of concept and it relates, it aligns. You must be a brother of mine because we're speaking the same language. Let's do this. As we get to the end of the pod here, uh, let's talk a little bit about you. What do you got? What do you got? Moving forward, you've done some amazing work. Anything happening in your world you want to talk about, and what's happening coming up next?
Like I said, this new firm is still fairly young. Working with a few people, I don't want to name clients, but a couple state departments of education, a couple of districts that I'm working with.
Mm,
But what I really want to do, in sort of circling back to the start of the podcast, I want to find a way to support everyone as they improve practice.
mm,
I've got this sort of resource kit, like resource hub, I guess, called Elevate Work-Based Learning or Elevate WBL,
mhm,
where I'm developing guides, doing workshops, doing partnership satisfaction surveys, doing communication audits. Like, what can I do to help districts build internal capacity?
mhm.
Yeah, I don't want to really come in and do it for them. I want to give them the tools and the resources to be great. And eventually that'll need me. It's
Yeah.
fantastic. I want to
That,
see them build capacity and just turn into an engine. Do I have the mix right or all the resources right? I don't know. We'll figure it out as
we'll
we go
find
along.
out.
But it's when you launch a product or build a business, it's ready, fire, aim.
Yeah.
Here's what I think is needed. Let me put it out there, and now let me churn. And so I'm kind of at the churn phase. So if anybody has ideas, it's like they didn't talk about this. This would really move the needle for us.
Yeah.
I hear that. I want to help, and I'm sincere in that because I think what we're doing is important. So if I can make a contribution, I want to know that I'm doing the right things.
Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah, I like to say it's like my good friend Evil Knievel. Let's hit the biggest jump, but let's just make sure our training wheels are on.
There you go.
So,
Beautiful.
yeah. Final question. I like to ask this of everybody that I have on my pod is our tagline is teach like it's 2045. The future is clear. Teach like it's 2045. What do you see education being, the relationship with education and our community business partners? What do you see that looking like in 2045?
This is the wish list, big vision sort of thing. Um, I think, and maybe this is just techno dreaming, but I think we lose the school walls.
Mhm.
I think that, you know, I think learning can happen anywhere. It doesn't have to take place in a building. I think it can take place across a community. And I would love to see young people, and it's still an education experience. We still have to structure it and uh, guide them. But I think to immerse them in the real world, that would be my vision.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but the idea of sequestering kids away in a building, and everything is separated and sequential. Science is separate from math, is separate from social studies, is separate from English. And in the real world, young people live in an immersive society. Everything happens
Yeah.
all at once. And I would love to see them just immerse in the real world rather than sort of the artificial structure of traditional schooling.
Yeah.
Um, we'll see.
I like it. Very, very well said. We'll do it together, Brett. We'll
Perfect.
figure it
Beautiful.
out. Appreciate it. Hey, I really, really want to thank you for joining me today. If somebody would want to reach out and get a hold of you, how could they do that?
Yeah, you could go to roundhousepartnerships.com, or if you want to look at the Elevate website, it's elevatewbl.com. And my contact information is at both places. I'd love to hear from people.
Yeah.
So just to throw ideas around and brainstorm, sort of like what we did here today. Um, I love to connect because so many people are doing so much interesting work.
Mm.
And I just want to learn what's happening out there.
Agreed. Agreed. Really appreciate it. Thanks again, Brett, for taking the time.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott.
You bet. And as we depart, remember the future is clear. Take care, everybody.